Aesthetics. They range from periods of history, to fashion, cultures, and of course, internet communities. Not to mention Windows PC home screens. I'm Zeep. I have a lot of aesthetics on my mind, including vaporwave, the Y2K aesthetic, and of course, the one we all remember from our childhoods, frutiger aero, alongside a couple other fun aesthetics. Enough messing around, we have some styles to appreciate. If you want a sequel to this, get this to 5,000 likes. Once again, I'm your favorite YouTuber Zeepsterd. Please subscribe, guys. We're growing bigger every single day. Let's get right to it. Liminal space. Liminal space is one of the more trendy aesthetics that has been deeply popularized by portraying empty and abandoned places that are often eerie or surreal. Think about those abandoned malls that are right by your houses that you remember going to a bunch as a kid, but as time progressed and as you would go back, you would notice stores would just close and close and there would just be these empty patches of empty storefronts everywhere. Such was the case with a mall nearby my house, which was just there, but with no stores inside of it. It was just a completely abandoned mall. Liminal space is that transition of these completely empty areas that should be packed with people, but they're just not. Think about like school during the summertime. These places are completely empty and it feels just unnatural, just weird. If you look at images, it just feels like something's off. Like I shouldn't be looking at this school this way. However, looking at these images also invoke nostalgia, such as staring at a school hallway, a waiting room. It's like you have memories attached to this image, but you also don't have memories attached to this area being so empty. That's the beauty about liminal space in a way. These areas that should be vibrant with life seem just dead and just look eerily more sinister and uncanny because there's no movement happening. This is when I bring in the subject of the backrooms, explained as an endless dimension of rooms that have not been detailed that lead to nowhere. To coincide with the idea of seeing things that are unnatural, the backrooms have been defined as what you see when you no-clip out of reality. The basic idea of the backrooms stemmed from a copy pasta that was posted on 4chan. If you're not careful and you no-clip out of reality in the wrong areas, you'll end up in the backrooms, where it's nothing but the stink of old moist carpet, the madness of mono yellow, the endless background noise of fluorescent lights at maximum hum buzz, and approximately 600 million square miles of randomly segmented empty rooms to be trapped in. God save you if you have heard anything else walking by, because it sure as hell has heard you. It is that last sentence right there that has turned the idea of liminal space even more horrifying and unsettling than it actually is. Fans of liminal space and the backrooms have created a series of entities that exist within this alternate universe. Just recently, there was this short found footage film that took the backrooms concept and made it horrifying by establishing a monster that is so out of this universe. Yeah, you want to know something interesting? So this fan found footage film, the person who made this was only 16 when he created it. That being said, Kane Pixels does an incredible job creating the backrooms and somehow making the entire idea of liminal space alive. Whatever entity or entities that haunt the liminal space, they are constantly on the watch. But that's the incredible thing about this aesthetic, is that even without the monsters, the simplicity of just being alone in a place that seems oddly familiar, it doesn't feel like you're at home, it feels more uncomforting. But why is it this case? Why is it when we see something like an empty parking lot, a household with all its furniture removed, we just get this unnerving feeling? Well, it really comes down to we just don't think about these locations when it comes to them being eventually abandoned or just done for. Think of like a dystopian video game. You know, something like Fallout, we see an America that's widely in ruins. The once bustling and hustle of the United States coming to an end due to nuclear warfare. But even when it comes to that, we have gotten used to how that looks. An entire era known as the Cold War that constantly alarmed Americans of potential nuclear Armageddon, of destroyed towns, cities, and wildlife. As odd as it is to state, we have gotten used to that. We have gotten used to destruction. We have not gotten used to locations abandoned, but still with the same structures as how we have remembered them. What makes it even more weirder is when there's even light in these abandoned locations. There should be people here, right? It should be open, correct? Because the light's on. I remember going to this mall that was about to be destroyed with a couple of my friends, and no one else was really there. The lights are all on, but something just felt so odd about being in that building in an area we all remembered would usually be packed. And that's another thing about liminal space. Yes, it can be disturbing, but it can also be just saddening. We have nostalgia for these places. We constantly want to think about the good times from our childhoods. So when we see something that's familiar, that used to bring us happiness, there's always that thought in our head, what happened to the place I loved? Eventually, the mall has to close down for the day. Everybody has to go and pick up their cars in the parking lot, and eventually summer comes to bring the school year to an end. As mentioned prior, liminal space is this transition era for a location. It is both the end and the beginning of what something will eventually become. One day, the school year will begin once again. To those who are moving out of this house, a new family will eventually move into this new home. In December of 2021, I went to a small town place in Florida and discovered this gas station at around 2 in the morning. Although my time looking at the gas station was brief, I just thought about who ran that gas station, thinking about the usuals who would go by that location to buy whatever goods they needed. There it was, empty, not full of life, but still lit up, on a cold 2 in the morning day in December. What is there left to say but that it just seemed so empty? But at the same time, while looking at it, I couldn't help but just feel comforted, knowing that all these people in this small town probably know about this gas station, know the owner, that they probably have some sort of connection with each other. So in a way, this location isn't too empty after all. Vaporwave. So vaporwave started off as more of a music genre, but eventually morphed into a more iconic and visual aesthetic filled with plenty of pastel colors, and one with a deeper message about modern consumerism and the nostalgia of the late 1970s to the early 2000s. My first exposure to vaporwave was actually in the year 2016, and it was a Simpsons edit that I thought was pretty cool. The song makes me think about Blade Runner, which is funny because it's overlaid by footage of The Simpsons, edited for things to look really chaotic, but somehow calming in the same way. A key part of vaporwave is its anti-capitalist or even pro-capitalist message. Now let me stress, not every vaporwave product is inherently political or trying to deliver some sort of anti-consumerist message. However, that is a decent deal with them. I mean, that's what vaporwave was essentially built upon. That Simpsons vaporwave I had just mentioned has a clip in it and where a pool of blood comes out with $100 bills keyed in. I mean, to some, vaporwave is interpreted as an ironic critique of capitalism, using consumer culture to produce stuff that isn't always done for the sake of profit. While the other pro-capitalist message basically essentially says, hey, this stuff is cool and I'd like to put music behind it, and also these pastel colors. With all that mumbo jumbo out of the way, let's get to why people actually do like vaporwave. I'd say the genre ended up becoming more replicating the consumerist aesthetics of the 80s and 90s. And of course, at the core, one of the main parts of vaporwave was the synths in its music. Much like liminal space, vaporwave tries to envision the idea of nostalgia. Yes, for someone like me who enjoyed vaporwave, I wasn't around for the 1980s or 1990s. I mean, I was born in 1999. The cool thing about vaporwave is that the images and music gives you a different version of what that era was like, enough to give the viewer nostalgia. For example, I didn't grow up to see the Mac Tonight ad to air back during the 80s, but when I'm watching this music video and hear this wonderful funky song, it feels incredibly comforting. Vaporwave extracts consumerism, creating its own form of art over random commercials from the 1980s or TV shows from the 90s. For example, one of my favorite vaporwave songs, Beach Walk by Whitewoods, has a really simple music video that just uses vintage commercials as its backdrop. One of the top comments exemplifies the feeling of vaporwave pretty well. It's by the YouTube user Fungus. I didn't grow up in the old times, and I really don't know much about that kind of technology and stuff, but this video makes me feel something very strong. I've listened to the song so much that I feel one with it itself. The song is amazing, the visuals are incredible, and honestly, this is my favorite song, and it will be for a long time. It has earned a place in my heart. Keep in mind, this music video was released on YouTube in 2010. So the video itself, which was already trying to invoke nostalgia, is nostalgic for people who are growing up around this time now, because it's been a full 13 years since then. To many, this song takes them back to the year 2015 to 2017, because that's when vaporwave was making its rounds and really becoming popular. That being said, the exact focal point of when vaporwave started isn't exactly set in stone. Most people characterize the Macintosh Plus record, Floral Shop, to be vaporwave's origin point. I've listened to the record before, and it's very classic in its vaporwave sounds, using its synths, and also with its very simplistic cover. The cover uses a bust of a Greek god, alongside a simplistic background of a checkered pink floor, and a vintage cityscape. As for me, when it comes to this record, the album doesn't make me nostalgic for the 80s, but rather the mid-2010s. Vaporwave as an aesthetic is a huge part of internet culture, and would eventually eventually lead to things such as synthwave, and some even more bizarre aesthetics such as labor wave, which combines Marxism with the vaporwave aesthetic. Seriously, Karl Marx really looks far out here. Spain wave, which comments on Spain history and modern Spain politics for whatever reason. Not to mention the spaced out words, that's pretty important when it comes to vaporwave, adds to the distinct style of it all. Vaporwave really reminds me of the summertime, especially the summer of 2017, when I would drive with my friends over to Los Angeles and look at the skyline and listen to these tunes. Driving through the lit up buildings at night, it really added to something special about the nighttime city driving. And that's what vaporwave was. It was a music genre, but also a visual style to it all. Today, every time I drive through Los Angeles, I think about vaporwave every now and then. And even then, I turn on a tune to remind me of that summer where vaporwave just seemed to be the vibe of it all. Dreamcore. Dreamcore is surreal. Unlike liminal space, dreamcore is more comforting and captures an era based on the 2000s, focusing on the general feeling of a dream using bright colors such as rainbow patterns, blue, pink, white, and even green. Yes, it feels familiar, but unlike liminal space, these images are not actually possible in our universe. For example, these images could be photoshopped hills, buildings that are floating, or even like fantasy-like lands to give off that dream type of aesthetic. It helps create that idea that you could only make these images in your dreams. It could never actually be real. In 2020 to 2021, these dreamlike visuals gained a lot of popularity thanks to TikTok. And, well, that makes sense. You see, in the year 2020, when the pandemic started, a lot of us took to home and did a lot of sleeping in. Hence, a lot of dreaming. Despite dreamcore being comfortable, it also isn't afraid to add the most bizarre elements of dreams, which remain dominant in this TikTok trend, with people envisioning eyes looking at you, or the bizarreness of a train flying through the sky.
If you see eyes looking at you, ignore them. They're purely watching. They won't harm you as long as you're on the train. Rumor has it that the eyes belong to those who didn't get off at the right stop.
There's something about dreamcore that takes me back to 2020 to 2021 that has this bizarre nostalgia to it, even though it wasn't that long ago. You know, it's March of 2023, it's officially been 3 years since the pandemic first began. I mention this because my argument is dreamcore goes hand in hand with the pandemic, an era that many thought was uneasy, but still somehow comfortable. Something about being inside the house all day, with no real worries, and also realizing that life would not be like this ever again, and that this was only temporary. For me, and so many others, we remember sleeping in during this era, not having to go to work, and really being left with our own imaginations. In the same vein, dreamcore is tightly associated with weirdcore. We have to think about the era of when these things were popular. What was happening at the world at the time, in 2020 to 2021, was weird. We had never seen the world so empty. At the same time, weirdcore isn't really creepy like liminal space, more just odd, but still to many, it's slightly comforting. The purpose of dreamcore is to be slightly confusing, disorienting, but yet also nostalgic. Here's the thing, weirdcore's origins extend back to the late 1990s to early 2000s, but had a striking surge during the early 2020s, once again coinciding with dreamcore. These images are the images you could only make up in your mind while you're sleeping, where your imagination runs wild. A musical artist that reminds me of this area is Jack Stauber, one of the first starting points of weird and dreamcore. And if you ever watch one of his music videos, you'd be able to comprehend why I think of this artist. They are bizarre, but the music is very aesthetical and coincides with this time period very well, as he grew to prominence in the early 2020s. His music videos make me feel a variety of things. For one, it makes me feel happy. They're kind of cute in a weird way, but it's also kind of uncomfortable, but it also makes me really impressed by the stop motion in a lot of these music videos. These videos follow that 90s aesthetic that I mentioned prior when it came to weirdcore. It's really a mix of confusion, fear, and intrigue, but also a sense of calmness. There isn't anything super aggressive when it comes to Jack Stauber songs, as he usually sings fairly softly, alongside very vibey instrumentals that I think really fit with the aesthetic. Jack Stauber has these consistent themes that fit with a very all-over-the-place vision, and that in itself is what I think really encapsulates dreamcore and weirdcore. It's all these visions that belong in our dreams, and that we end up making up and trying to reenact in real life. If you look at the comments for a lot of these dreamcore to weirdcore videos, you find some interesting statements. Patsy Unknown writes, "Dreamcore and weirdcore always makes me either want to cry or be extremely happy. Sometimes it's a sickening mix of the two, like stomach medicine I used to take as a kid. And honestly, I relate to this sentiment. Dreamcore and weirdcore does make me think about my childhood, but it also makes me think about how I was in 2020 and in 2021, which I think many of you could relate to. The feeling was isolating, but somehow comforting. Trying to articulate that feeling is kind of difficult. Calling it surreal is not enough. These images are the escape of the realities of the world, the bleakness that not everything will always go as planned, that hurt is inevitable. But at this moment when you're looking at these images, you don't feel that. Although things are odd, they aren't exactly dangerous. I don't know. For me, it's comforting. I mean, it is. But it's also kind of sad because it takes me back to an era in 2021 right before things became chaotic. I know this video isn't meant to be extremely personal, but dreamcore really is nostalgic. And it does come with a sense of sadness, as with other nostalgic things tend to come with. You know, when I was a kid, I used to dream about this hot air balloon in the distance that I would see from time to time every time I would visit my optometrist. I have been visiting this optometrist every 2 years, ever since I was in the 2nd grade. So whether it be dreaming or in real life, this hot air balloon image keeps leaving me perplexed. And of course, it's been edited, as I'm not the only one who's been able to see this image, as so many people go to the optometrist, but there's something comforting about the picture that's left me this way for the past nearly 18 years since I first seen it. When I first saw the photo, I thought it was weird. Looking at it now, I still think it is weird, but it also brings me this sense of sadness, but also nostalgia. It's odd. It's a really odd photo. Of course, when I associate this image, I imagine it as blurry, as it's presented at first this way to try and practice what type of vision you have. The thing is, as weird as this image is, I wouldn't want to see it any other way. With the upcoming car, with a hot air balloon that seems to be in the middle of the road, although it's probably obviously floating, something a part of me is so used to this image. And that's what dreamcore and weirdcore is really about. Something familiar that isn't really possible, but knowing that it isn't possible brings you comfort. And if I'm being honest, when it comes to images like these, I don't want to leave it. But I know one day you have to get back to reality. The Y2K aesthetic. You guys ever watched The Matrix? I mean, it really came out at the perfect time, 1999, just at the turn of the millennium, and when yours truly was born. Somehow I'm 23 years old and I've lived through 4 decades, 2 millenniums, and 2 centuries. But you know, I'm not bragging. Once again, the thing about The Matrix is that it really was a product of its time, coming out in an era where everything futuristic seemed to be super shiny, with gradients, translucence, and a slick look of what the future could be. Not only that, but it is also nostalgic for a future that never came. It's interesting because it's kind of like this metallic, glossy era with 3D rendered visuals that have kind of aged poorly, but are still incredible to look at. A console that I think really encapsulates this entire feeling is the Sega Dreamcast. The Sega Dreamcast was released on September 9th, 1999, with games such as Sonic Adventure, Crazy Taxi, Space Channel 5, and Jet Set Radio releasing on the system. And these games had a couple characteristics that reminded me of this aesthetic. For example, the villain of Sonic Adventure, Chaos, is this glossy and freaky character that is very much a product of its time. You see, the colors that describe Y2K include gray, white, chrome, a light blue, and greenish colors. Everything just seems so shiny and glossy. The fashion itself, it was shiny clothing, leather pants, oak leaves with various type of gradients, and very blubbly electronics. Chaos's design as a villain reminds me of this futuristic type of alien that has that blue, turn of the millennium type of approach. Everything about the Y2K aesthetic, even down to the commercials and devices being used, had this curvy aesthetic. Remember those computers you would use in the early 2000s while in class that were like blue or green? That is Y2K right there. It's this blobby type of approach that makes it so iconic and also kind of trippy. In fact, Apple was one of the spearheads of this Y2K movement. You see, prior to the Apple G3, Microsoft computers had this blocky approach when it came to desktops. Apple wanted to redefine what a computer could look that would make it more entertaining and less office looking. You know, these computers were incredibly colorful, but at first, these PCs were met with a lot of critique of it looking incredibly childish. I mean, now we think it's iconic, and we do think about our childhood when we look at these computers, and I have to give Apple mad props, as now a lot of us are able to resonate with this type of design. When it came to music videos around this time as well, oh my god, this type of aesthetic was like everywhere. If you guys ever look up the music video for What's It Gonna Be by Busta Rhymes and Janet Jackson, it is one of the most early 2000s music videos you have ever seen. So there's this guy named Hype Williams who was the director for a lot of these music videos by various famous artists, and he kept using this fisheye perspective that would define that era. A lot of the clothing in these music videos would be metallic and even latex looking. You know, I look at something as simple as the startup menu for the original Xbox, and immediately I'm just like, oh, that's Y2K right there. That's early 2000s. Cause it is, it's that bubbly feel, that green type of feeling that was so dominant around this time. At the turn of the millennium, there was so much optimism about the future, but eventually, it all had to come to an end. The new millennium had officially started.
Here's to another lousy millennium.
Historic events such as the dot-com bubble bursting, the September 2001 attacks, and the War on Terror led to more nihilism to come in, and eventually the Y2K aesthetic being replaced by the make-bling era by the time 2004 rolled around. However, although the sense of optimism about the future eventually vanished, there were still remnants of Y2K and other types of aesthetics that would come in by the end of the 2000s. In this way, Y2K has never fully died. In fact, recently, over the past year or so, there have been claims stating that Y2K has been coming back. Personally, I think it might be too early to see if this thing is really coming back, or if it's just some random TikTok trend of early 20-year-olds reminiscing about their childhoods. And I can't blame loving that nostalgia. Sure, some critics say that the trend was tacky, but personally I thought it was really cool. This sense of newness, these qualities that the future was going to be this holographic utopia around buildings filled with baby blue, greenish, and metallic and sparkling qualities that would replace this old era of the 20th century. It may have been too optimistic for us to think that this would happen, but for the time period, we truly thought it was happening. Frutiger aero. One of my earliest memories happened in 2004. I went to the movies with my mom to watch the SpongeBob SquarePants movie. I couldn't contain my excitement. I loved SpongeBob as a kid, and I also loved Nickelodeon. Before the movie started, Nickelodeon used a movie intro that they would only use once, as they knew just how special this intro really was, and how special this movie truly was. And when I first saw it, I thought it was beautiful. The music, the vibrant colors, the fish coming out. Little did I know what this was. The origins of Frutiger aero stem back to the mid-2000s, and it is most synonymous with Windows computers. It followed the end of the Y2K era, and was characterized by its glossy textures, nature, water, bubbles, flourishing patterns, bright and vibrant colors. Everything about this just makes me so happy. Frutiger aero was that sense of optimism left behind by Y2K with a new flavor that carried over the rest of the 2000s, despite whatever outside world events that would try to bring this sense of optimism downwards. The key concepts having to do with Frutiger aero have to do with skeuomorphism. That is when a logo is trying to mimic its real-life counterpart, but with its own distinct style. Think of, say, the original Instagram logo, and its attempt at trying to look like a camera. Things look very glassy, and also very bright. The design wasn't limited to just technology, however. They could also range in things such as a soap bottle. Yeah, I'm not kidding. Frutiger aero was everywhere, we just didn't really know it yet. A key object of Frutiger aero, pointed out by another YouTuber by the name of Kylie in their own Frutiger aero video, is that of the eye dog. The iDog is synonymous with the glassy feel of the future. It was designed to run around and play music from your MP3 and have these circle colors lighting up while you were listening to, say, I don't know, In the End by Linkin Park. Things that really remind me of Frutiger aero are really the entire existence of the Wii's catalog. Games such as Super Mario Galaxy, Wii Sports, the Wii Shop channel itself. I mean, the music right there, it just reminds me of the entirety of the aesthetic. Even movies like the Bee Movie. That's right, I said the Bee Movie remind me of Frutiger aero. I guess for a more sophisticated and better film, you could go to Meet the Robinsons, with its bright and very greenish colors, and also entire optimism of the future. If you want to look at another video game series that resembles this entire aesthetic, look at Little Big Planet. Everything about it is Frutiger aero. From the very first cutscene that shows this entire world skewed with its realism, with Sackboy running around and interacting with these real-life elements. Finally, when it comes to Frutiger aero, look no other place than Windows 7. From everything having to do with the interface to even the exit tab, everything about this resembles what this entire aesthetic was about. Nature, glass, and such vibrant colors. Remember that soap bar I mentioned earlier? That's the smell I think of whenever I think about Frutiger aero, as bizarre as that may sound. But do you want to know something? I'm not alone when it comes to this observation. Looking at this aesthetic has so many feeling happy. You know, we're all growing older. Fruitiger aero was a phase in our life that was so popular, but as with other phases, they tend to die down, with it really going away in 2013. In 2013, I entered my freshman year of high school, the official bridge into what I considered officially being a teenager as. It's funny, because Fruitiger aero was widely considered to end in 2013, when my childhood experience came to a close as well. To many, the entire aesthetic brings them back to when they were a kid, and as seen time and time again in this video, it's that feeling that we really desperately want to hold on to. Recently, there's been an upwards trend when it comes to Fruitiger aero's presence on the pop cultural stage. And of course, I'm not going to dig on people trying to bring it back because I think that's really cool. But I will say is that it won't be the same as it was, say, around 2004 to 2013, because that era just can't be replicated ever again. At least not the same way, that is. What made that moment so special in time was the environment of it all. That Windows 7 interface, the Nintendo Wii main menu, what I felt when I first saw that Nickelodeon intro for the SpongeBob SquarePants movie. And although to some they may be sad that that era is over with, I found enjoyment in knowing that it happened. You know, my favorite Fruitiger aero film is WALL-E, released in 2008. Its message is basically simple: love the environment, or else a future of destruction and a ruined Earth is almost certain. Fruitiger aero was that optimism of loving the future, of believing that there's something more out there, and by the end of the film, despite a destroyed Earth, there's still hope for that future as they begin to plant new life on the planet. To me, Fruitiger aero has never been about the doom and gloom, but always about the hope for a better tomorrow.